everybody? Welcome back to another week of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast. I hope you've had an amazing start to your week, but if not, we can kickstart that right here. I'm your host, Ian Kahinde, and as I talked about in last week's episode, the podcast studio has flooded. We are a nomadic podcast for now, so we'll be recording at different locations every single week, and this is the beginning of that. But anyways, let me get through this week's bulletin board. So September 25th, you can watch 2023's Problemista. The link to register will be in the description of this episode, and I'll make sure to have an overlay come up so you can scan a QR code as well. Secondly, Envisioning a Just Pittsburgh, October 20th is the deadline. They're doing their second call for art submissions. There is criteria. There are cash prizes. So as I have been saying, I think you'd be doing yourself a disservice to not share your art with the community. Take a look at the link in the description to find out what the overall criteria is. Lastly, if you are interested in coming on this podcast, as always, nominations link can be found in the link tree for this podcast. And before I forget, we are currently looking to hire an intern to take the reins for this podcast. So if you are interested in becoming the face of this podcast and you are either currently an honor student or working to become an honor student, there will be a link in the link tree for a form that you can fill out so we can get that information over to you. But anyways, y'all, everything else aside, I have the incredible Jamie Christian of Let Us Turn Up the Beet Sustainability Collective. How are we feeling today?
I am doing well, my friend. I am doing well. Couldn't be better. Happy to have you here. Welcome to our space. Thank you for joining us today.
I hope that the people who are watching this don't know how hectic today has been. Maybe you can see it in my face a little bit. But
you're just getting. Here's the thing. It's preparing you for parenthood in the future. Because that's what it's like.
Precisely.
Every day is a different day. It's a different story. It's a different disaster, and those are life lessons. So just think of it as pre-parenting preparation.
I'm with you. But anyways, y'all. So as always, we'll be going through Jamie's backstory, what's made her the person that she is. She'll be passing on her greatest life advice. And in the second half, after our artist spotlight, we'll be talking about food insecurity in immigrant communities. But anyways, everything else aside, take me from the beginning.
Hi, I'm Jamie Marie Christian. I'm a 46-year-old single mom who lives in South Park Township. I actually was born and raised there. Not born there. I was born in a hospital, not far away. But my parents built their house there in '74 and never moved because they just liked the area so much. And it was a farming community, and with the coal mining town, two coal mining towns kind of adjacent, and they all became one community. It's on the southern side of the actual county park, so it's right at the border of Washington and Allegheny County. So I kind of had the best of both worlds, and I could walk to the end of my street and down another street, and I was in Washington County, which is very rural, and be 15, 20 minutes away from the city. So, but it's definitely given me an interesting perspective, and as an adult, when I moved back 8 years ago, a vantage point, especially during the pandemic, whenever I was able to travel easily to farms in Westmoreland and Washington County because of my location, and having to get out of the house because my 6th grader needed to do work and my 2-year-old was terrorizing him. So yes, but my parents were from Beechview in Brookline, and I spent a lot of time in Beechview growing up at my grandmother's house. So a lot of her neighbors remained her neighbors until she passed away, and I still am friends with those folks today and their families. So it's just an extended family. And my grandmother grew up in Carrick, which is where our office is located now, and my great grandmother lived there. So I have a pretty strong connection to these communities just through family, but also came back around to connect again later in life whenever I had my oldest son and he started at an international studies charter school.
You got that Yinzer bloodline.
I got the Yinzer bloodline, but not the accent for some reason.
Honestly, I can't even like put my finger on a Pittsburgh accent. Everybody says Dan Tan and
I don't see it.
I
I don't
say
know.
that. I
My
don't
my
get it.
parents have more of that accent. I think because of they grew up in the city. But yeah, my sister does, and I don't know. I just never it never really stuck with me. So yeah, I lived in South Park until I graduated high school. And 2 weeks after graduation, I decided I was going to move out, and I moved to the South Side in my first apartment and lied to the owners, and they gave me a job. I was 17. I told them I was 18.
Of course.
I'm a real good role model. But yeah, I spent a lot of time in the South Side as a teenager and really liked it. And it was so different than where I grew up, because where I grew up was 85% white. And there were a few black families and maybe 3 or 4 Indian families, and I think 2 Asian families. And so other than going to like soccer tournaments and stuff, I had never really met Latino folks or Middle Eastern folks or, folks really from any other place, but from my community. And I was fortunate to be able to, travel to some places. But when I was 17, right after I moved out, I decided to take myself to New York, and I hopped on a bus and gave my parents a heart attack because I didn't have a cell phone at the time. I had a beeper.
Oh, wow. They're probably beeping that all day.
Yeah. And I bought myself a bus ticket. I went to New York. I was doing some modeling stuff at the time. And so I just took my book and went shopping in 1 week in November, right before Christmas, and a blizzard hit. And, that was the first time I had been to New York City. And one of the first places I went was Chinatown. And it was so just great and awesome to me. And I, had been to the Strip District before. So it was I thought I had experienced some culture there, and it wasn't. It's being in Manhattan. It's a whole different world.
You got hit with a culture shock.
Yeah. But in a good way. So, yeah, I lived all over Pittsburgh. I've lived in Ohio. I worked in the airline industry in my 20s. Was all over having fun, and moved to Toledo actually, to backtrack a little bit, I lived in Columbus whenever I was in my early 20s, and I was going to school there, and I was working at the post office during Christmas time, and that was the first time I met someone from Somalia. There was a very, very large Somali community there, and that was kind of my first experience with talking to somebody who was saying that the food that they were getting here was making them sick. And the guy that I was dating at the time, his mom worked for OSU, and she used to work for the food science department. So I would hear all these stories about the things that they were creating. And I had always been very the vegetable kid in my family. I was always wanting to plant stuff. My mom was not a gardener. Her mother was a gardener. My dad was a lawn guy, but I always wanted to plant herbs and fruits and vegetables and stuff. And so my grandmother had a big garden I would, go check out whenever we were there. But I was always the kid that ate all their vegetables, all of it. I, just always was like that. And so my mom usually cooked from scratch also. So I wasn't really used to eating boxed things until I went to college. So it's it kind of resonated with me, but I had never really realized that, hey, there are folks that are coming here that this food is not, it's literally killing them at a very fast rate. So moved back to Pittsburgh, and I worked for the airline industry, and that was even more eye-opening because then I got to see more places. And we just did domestic flights, but, I got to travel quite a bit on my own, and also just traveling to different cities and seeing the different immigrant and refugee populations that were popping up all over, the East Coast and the Midwest. And the food. I had always been a big fan of food.
I think we all are.
Yeah. And that's why when I moved back to Pittsburgh and there was a huge influx of Latino and Nepali folks, I was just yay! Because before there was, all these great Mexican places, we had Chi-Chi's. Chi-Chi's was some plastic,
oh boy.
Gringo. It was bad, but that's people thought it was good. But you went to the Chi-Chi's at Parkway Center Mall.
Some people.
Yeah, yeah. So that was, or that or Taco Bell was the closest that we had to anything, relatively Mexican. And my college roommates when I went to school here were from Toledo, and there's a huge Latino population, and also Lebanese. And one thing that I did grow up eating a lot of was like hummus and gyros and pita and, a lot of Middle Eastern stuff. And my dad said that his grandmother, and it was my dad that always had it, but his grandmother always had it at her house. And it was his dad's mom, and he was estranged from his father. But his mother, my dad's mother was very racist, and he never knew that his dad was actually Middle Eastern, part Middle Eastern, because my grandmother hid it. But they always wondered why their grandmother had this stuff at their house, because she was Middle Eastern. We didn't find out until I was like in my 30s.
That's crazy.
Yeah, it's really weird. But it's a small fraction, but I mean, it's very apparent. But it's like, the more I got to travel and experience different cuisine, the more appreciation I had for, different cultures and meeting people too. Like, food brings people together. Even, Southern food. I love Southern food. Some of my favorite overnights or like crew meals would be at like this place in Louisville where they would give you chocolate cake that's made with lard.
Oh, wow.
All the bad things, but yeah, so good. Like, just in every place you go to in the South, different types of barbecue and different types of pimento cheese. And, so... but there's also, in different areas, you can see the influence in the food. And so that's kind of like how I really like got into like the whole like food thing. But sustainability has kind of been part of my life since I was like 15 or 16 years old. And it first started with vintage shopping at thrift stores. People don't think about that, but that is a sustainable practice. And then I was like one of those kids that carried my silverware with me. And so I was very concerned about the environment at the time, not really too much into agriculture, but did like to grow things, was, developing more of an interest in nutrition and food and stuff. And, it kind of proceeded into, college, where I was the friend that cooked. I would go to the Strip District on Saturday morning. We'd be out partying all night. My friends would crash. I'd get up and go to the Strip District, buy all my groceries for the week, and they'd wake up and I'd have like sauce going and like doing stuff for burritos, and so I was feeding everybody. But yeah, I then worked in finance I worked in the airline industry, and then kind of transitioned to finance, and I still bartended and worked front of the house jobs, like just for something to do and extra money. I didn't have kids. I was in my late 20s, and when I was 30, or 27, 28, I moved to Toledo to go back to school again. And there's a huge Lebanese and, like I said, Latino population there. I worked at a Mexican and Italian restaurant, and it was called Carlita's. And they had a Mexican and German restaurant on the street. Like, these really
That's a combo.
Yes.
It's an interesting combo.
But it's almost like Little Dearborn. So Dearborn, Michigan, huge Lebanese population. It's like Little Lebanon. And Toledo is like Little Dearborn. So it was a really cool culinary experience, and I have a lot of great friends still to this day from different neighborhoods in Toledo, and different cultural backgrounds. And so I feel like it was more of a melting pot than Pittsburgh was at that time. And then I moved back here, and I was like, yes, we have good food now. And
now let me ask a question. What would you say the relationship is between food and culture for you?
I think it is. Food is just another medium that an artist can work in, and any artist, their experience, their emotion, the love of where they're at, and the materials that they're working with really comes through in the flavors, and the flavors are really kind of like different shades of color. They're different profiles. And it's really just it's an experience. And so I feel like when you're eating something like the lunch we just had from the place across the street, it's like it almost like transports you there. I mean, when I was eating that tostada, I'm like, that's the closest thing that I've had in a very long time since I went to Cancun when I was in my 20s and ate a tostada right off of a street vendor outside of a club. So it really. I think it's in a way it kind of transports you into that culture, and so it's painting also a beautiful landscape of what it is like to be there.
I'm with it.
Does that make sense?
I'm with it. That's probably the same way I feel about food. I am Yoruba Nigerian. I've always grown up on Yoruba food, Nigerian food,
Yeah.
and it makes me feel closer to
Yeah.
my family over there when I eat it. So I
Yeah.
definitely feel the same type of way.
Yeah, and that's what a lot of folks, who have immigrated here, whether they had to leave because they're were worried about being killed, or their families being killed, or they were here to further their education, or there is a huge disconnect that we do see in the immigrant, refugee and asylum communities when it comes to food and cultural relevance, and having something that is familiar makes you feel more at home. It makes you feel comfortable. It makes you feel like you belong in a place where you might not feel like you belong because you might not speak the language. And you might not read your own language, so then the only translations they have are written. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of glue in food. It really kind of like makes you, not, well, it really kind of brings you back home. Yeah. So it
So
connects your worlds. That's what I'm trying to say.
we've covered how you've always been a foodie
Yeah.
and how you've always been into sustainability. But how did we bring them together into the sustainability collective?
So I was working in, well, I ended up having a baby at 30, my beautiful Christian Alan Jacobson, who's now 15 years old, and the light of one of the two lights of my life, and likes to terrorize me on a daily basis. So he and I were living in what I thought was Mount Lebanon, and I thought he was going to be able to go to a Mount Lebanon school, and it turned out that we were in Shar Valley, which is a great school district, but my son has ADHD, and I knew that he would not thrive in that community or that school, so they had a very, very large class. So friends of ours from preschool, they were going to an international studies charter school in Baldwin Township, which was actually much closer to my house. That was the other thing. The other school was like 6 miles away. This one was like 2. So I enrolled him there, and I had actually just lost a child the year before. I was 20 weeks pregnant, and unfortunately my baby died from anencephaly. And it was really, really, really hard. And I was going through like a really rough time. And so he started kindergarten at this international studies charter school, and it was great because we met families from all over the world. I have taught kids, after school and in school from many, many different countries, and also many different neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh. So, we saw like, it was just a very eye-opening experience compared to like the school districts that I grew up in. So yeah, I was just chatting with some moms and a teacher one day, and we'd always gardened at our condo, and we had this little garden, or at my parents' house, and they were talking about, one mom said, I really want to do a garden. I'm like, I was just, talking to my friend about that. And I said, I saw this one grant, and I told them, I worked in finance, and I, be happy to take care of like that stuff. And I was really just supposed to be the finance person. There was a whole other agriculture person, and a teacher helping and whatnot. And after 6 months, unfortunately, they had some other issues going on where they had to move, and the child was being moved out of the school. And so I ended up kind of taking over everything, and had a couple teachers help me for a few years. And then I ended up, we built a school garden. And after I was kind of the only one left, I started going to sustainable agriculture conferences just to find funding and kind of find my feet. And because I wanted to keep it going, I didn't want it to have to close up shop or us not create programming because I was the only one left, and I was really just there to do like the business side of it. So I pretty much gave myself a very, very hands-on education, and it led me down a rabbit hole. It brought me where I'm at now. So he was in kindergarten at the time. So 2016-17, we started creating sustainability education programming after I went to a conference called NESOG, Northeastern Sustainable Agricultural Working Group, and it was in Hartford, Connecticut, and I drove with my then 7-year-old and my dog from Pittsburgh to Hartford, which was a rough drive. And I thought there was like a kids conference that he could go to, and I got there and they said it was for 13-year-olds. So I ended up having him with me the whole conference, and he did really great. But so we walked in, and the first person to come up to us was the interim executive director, and her name was Karen. And I'm so sorry, I cannot remember her last name for the life of me right now. But Hartford was an interesting place because it's the poorest city in the richest state in the richest country in the world.
I lived in Hartford.
Yeah. So it's like there's West Hartford, which is like Gilmore Girls, and then there's Hartford, which is like, a very large Portuguese population, very large Latino population, a lot of food apartheid, a lot. And a lot of it had to do with cultural relevance. And so here was this subject again that was popping up that like I, had always been in the back of my mind since I was in my 20s. And kind of throughout my, but not really like thinking about it like, oh wow, it's really like impacting these people and how they live their daily lives and their life expectancy. So during this conference, I again bumped into Karen, and she invited us to sit down with her, and we were viewing a film, and it was called Forgotten Farms, and it is a documentary about farmers in the dairy industry in the northeastern United States, and unfortunately, many have committed suicide. And it's an epidemic that has spread throughout the country, and it's not widely talked about. It's getting a little bit more traction now. Like most people didn't hear about it until it hit Montana. They don't know that it's happening in Pennsylvania, that farmers lose $400 per year per cow. So when the lights came up, I looked around, and there were these women that were sitting with us. It was the wives of the farmers. Sorry.
That's terrible.
Yeah. But it was kind of the catalyst of like why I wanted to create sustainability education programming. Instead of just like agriculture, because when you're teaching just agriculture, I mean, it is important. It's important to be able to grow food and know where your food comes from, but it's also important to know how to support those farmers. So that's why we went with the model that we created, where we teach. We were teaching agriculture, economics, ecology, nutrition, and self-care. And so we noticed during, this programming that kids were getting less sick from the year before. And one kid had like a huge gap in between the years, and that was my kid because he was in the garden every day. But we also noticed kids were eating more. And the school that they went to, at the time when my sons first started, they did have halal meals, but they were expensive. And a lot of the folks that were there either, we didn't have 100% free meals at the time, because they didn't know to register through Compass instead of just going to the school. So once they were able to get certified, they had to get rid of the halal meals because the provider that they had to go through did not provide them. So that was a huge issue, a lot of stuff getting thrown out. And we really started to look at that more, like, why is there so much food waste? Like, even, with kids who are not having an issue with cultural relevance, there was an issue with, them just not eating it because of sensory issues. So we created a sensory aversion tasting model and plan to help these kids. And a lot of kids who were just eating like bologna and hot dogs and wouldn't even touch pizza were then eating like salad and like pho and all these other things that we were making.
Real sustenance.
Yeah. In our after school program. And we started incorporating family meals where we would pick like a meal that was influenced from a culture that was not within the school, or maybe one of our friends who was from Ghana or Uzbekistan, or we would look at something from their country, and we would make plant-based versions of that, and then invite the kids' families in to do a dinner with us. So it really connects the families, which I'm very guilty of this. Like I usually eat separately from my family, and I'm the biggest hypocrite when it comes to that. But it's just like work and like I'm a single mom, so I'm like constantly running somebody somewhere. So when we do get to sit down together, it is super important. But it made a big difference, I think, in like the way kids like viewed food, but also like their time with their family as well, which is something that's very much missing in our society. So then the pandemic hit, and I sent kids home with stuff, and we started a community outreach program in response to the pandemic because the school district I was in didn't have a meal plan set up for that Monday, and it was Saturday night, and I called the guy who does the school nutrition program at the district, and he's like, we won't know until Sunday night. And I was like, well, I can't do that. So
Someone's got to do something.
yeah, I took some of my own money, like the last of what I had in my savings, went and bought a bunch of food and used a friend's restaurant and partnered with a caterer and some other restaurants and did meals and was part of a USDA program. So we just, and then partnered with the food bank, and Gordon's was dropping off food like every Thursday to my driveway. My kid and I would be out there. We'd unpack the boxes. We'd have volunteers come up. They'd get stuff to people. But over the course of like 2 years, I think we distributed like 90,000 pounds of food, gardening supplies, and personal care supplies.
That's
So
incredible.
that was the other cool thing is like, well, unfortunately, there were a lot of people like stuck in limbo at that time too, where they had just gotten to the United States and the world shut down. So they weren't able to get SNAP. They weren't able to get WIC. They weren't able to get senior food boxes. They had no jobs. They could not get a job. They couldn't speak the language. So we had people calling from CYS saying, hey, we have a family that needs food. So they were pulling up to my house too. And what was really cool is when I would get pictures back from a lot of these immigrant refugee families that were kind of like stuck in limbo. Either the meals that they made, which I was like, man, can you bring me some?
I need some flavor in my home.
Please. Or they would send me pictures of the gardens that they just grew, that they just, built. And they were so excited because this is something that they had done back home. And so I actually created a plan and a business plan for a online co-op at the time, which co-op models, sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. In economically depressed areas, they tend not to do too well unless you have like a lot of like donors, people giving money from the outside and a lot of grant funding. So it's not always beneficial to the farmer either, because sometimes they're buying a commodity and farmers lose money at commodity. So we wanted to try to work with the smaller farmers who were not getting as much traction as larger farms. And I connected with a lot of them during the pandemic by just taking my 2-year-old to their farm, because I, again, had to get him out of the house, with my 6th grader trying to do work and my 2-year-old going bananas and climbing all over his brother. So we just went to different farms and I talked to people and I started to hear things about organizations that I thought were helping them and were not. And this USDA program that we were a part of kind of like fell apart in the 3rd round, and by the end of the 5th round, Cisco had all of the contracts, and it was originally supposed to be stuff that was from local farms, so the farmers had something to do, somewhere to send their surplus, and they had planted for like the spring, and it was just a really messed up program that ended up giving people garbage and screwing over the farmers. So I gave my first testimony at a USDA hearing that I was requested to just respond to an email that like this would be okay for this person to say. I'm like, you don't need to speak on my behalf. I'm more than capable to. That was like the first time I have done public speaking of any form since I was in college, and I am not a good public speaker. I swear to God, I would never, give public testimony. I would never deal with politicians. I was so far removed from like the whole policy aspect of food, and I was aware of it. I got emails and stuff about it throughout the years, but I just didn't want to be a part of. Not that I didn't want to be a part of that world. I didn't want to be part of the drama. There's a lot of drama. And but that's also where you can make the biggest impact, unfortunately. So I got on and I said, I was number 40, and I saw all these organizations go before me and basically throw these farmers under the bus and beg for contracts. And I was just like, no, this thing needs to just go. It needs to be done. Take the money and put it into different grant programs that actually benefit people. Get rid of the matches that farmers have to get these grants, or put them in a situation where they have to people underwrite these grants for them, which isn't even really a thing. It's not a federally regulated industry. That kind of stuff it's regulated, and it's not. So it's just it's like loan sharking, for lack of a better term, and it ended up, they dismantled it, and they did do other things with the money, but it really left a bad taste in my mouth, and I was just like, man, I can either be a fat-ass white lady who sits on her butt and does nothing and just complains, or I could be a fat-ass white lady who opens her mouth and actually does something. And you know what? If people don't like it, oh well. So, and then I gave a testimony so somebody reached out to me from the Pittsburgh Food Policy Council, and said, hey, do you know about the Food Justice Fund? And I didn't at the time. And they said, would you like to, learn more about it and talk about it? And I was like, sure. So I started going to meetings, and I gave my second public testimony via Zoom to City Council for the Food Justice Fund. And that's kind of how I started to fall down that rabbit hole. And I, shortly thereafter, like literally a week later, I had the first of two very bad concussions. So I had two car accidents, both caused by deer. Yeah, both. I'm very lucky to have walked away from, but yeah, it was bad. I couldn't form sentences. I didn't recognize my children at first. It was just really, really bad. I don't remember chunks of 2021 and 2022, unless I see a picture. I don't have automatic recall. I couldn't recognize people. I mean, I would know their face, but I wouldn't know their name, more so than just I forgot. Yeah, so I was kind of out of commission for a while, and then, just to get myself, I did everything I could, everything I had learned, everything I had taught kids about ways to boost neuroplasticity through the program that we did, all of my research that I did up to that point really came into play, and it really helped me recover, because I think I recovered a little bit faster than I would have, and I have a little bit more cognition than I actually did before, and my executive functions are a little bit sharper. But it was a very eye-opening experience, and I needed to slow down and really kind of streamline what we were doing, and know what my capacity was. So by that time, I think that we were on our second Small and Mighty grant from the Pittsburgh Foundation. We got one in 2020, 2021. And that was my first interaction with Abdul Qadir Charamba from Manakucha Farms, and Kahar from BCAP. So we're all part of the same cohort for grantees. And so I started chatting with them at different events that we were at and corresponding, and connected with Abdul and started doing grant writing for him. So we kind of added that in and restructured our framework from, creating programming and teaching it, because I'm 46 years old. I have a spinal cord injury and MS and fibro. Yeah, I'm not out. I like to do things every once in a while. I can't do it regularly. We don't really have a staff to do that. And there's so many other people doing it now. And I did it for a long time. I did it for 5 years. So, it's, I started going to these executive director learning circles that I was so graciously gifted from the Pittsburgh Foundation and Forbes Funds and GPNP, and really, connecting with people, and especially from other immigrant and refugee groups, but also folks who were helping me get my shit together, for lack of a better term, having everything aligned. So, our focus is education, outreach, and advocacy. That's kind of the trifecta. I think that's how you make the greatest impact. But we took it where I created a learning model, which now I help other organizations make either their existing programming more impactful with this model, or, we help them create a program from the ground up that is going to make a bigger impact, because the things that they're engaging in the way that they're structuring it actually physically helps you change the neuroplasticity of your brain. And it's from a neurophysiological level, that's something that hasn't really been done before in too many programs when they're being designed. Usually it's just mentorship. Well, that's great, but there's still trauma that has happened, especially post-pandemic. There's a lot of trauma that's happened to a lot of people's brains, and especially sitting in front of computers for so long. People's brain growth has been stunted, and that is what really makes it more impactful, is when you add that element where it's impacting on a neurophysiological level. Then in regards to education and then outreach, we restructured, so we're now doing farmer outreach in addition to our community outreach. Our community outreach really does have a cultural relevant focus. And it is very small, unfortunately, right now, because of limited donations and funding. And then our farmer outreach is RE, which is basically a food hub where we provide technical support in the traditional sense, like grant writing, financial management skills, how to do a budget, but also I've created like a retail costing tool for like one gal for Lisa. Um, with Ben the Butcher, I created a franchise model, which we're hoping to pilot soon. It's a franchise meat counter model, so that like somebody like Lisa with her store, she would have one in there, and he would take care of like all the marketing and everything, and she would be able to get the meat at wholesale. With we're hoping to get funding to provide like a starter kit for at no cost with grant funding and like a meat case and whatnot. But really like ways to create innovative platforms as well. So we have a lot of. I can't give away too much what we're doing with that right now because of intellectual property rights and partners and whatnot. But there's very good things coming, and so.
All this is very exciting to hear.
Yes.
Now, before we hit this week's artist spotlight, the question that I ask every single person that comes on: what is the greatest piece of life advice that you can pass on to the audience?
So it took me a very long time to finally listen to my mom, and I'm just talking within the past 10 years, and take her advice that what other people think of you is not your business. Expectations are premeditated resentment, and don't expect people to do or act as you would do, and if you do something, don't expect anything in return. Do it because you want to do it, because it makes you feel good about yourself and makes you feel like you're a better person.
I like that.
Yeah.
I'm with that. Now, this week's artist spotlight. Now, the name of both this band and this song, quite a doozy. This is a sentence I will probably never be saying again in my life. But we will be playing the song "I Found God in a Gym Parking Lot" by I Swallow Ghost. So I hope y'all enjoy. Enjoyed I Found God in a Gym Parking Lot by I Swallow Ghost. The links to the artist page and their music will be in the description below. Now, finishing up September's theme of strength and diversity, where we talk about problems that not many talk about that do need a bigger spotlight. Jamie will be talking about food insecurity in immigrant communities. I leave the floor open to you.
Thank you so much. So when I was telling you about the Young Scholars School, that was, the first time I was really like interacting with kids from countries all around the world, and really hearing about like, even in talking to their families and families that would visit from, like I remember talking to one grandma from Jordan, and she was so excited that I gave her kale seeds because it was so expensive to buy it in Jordan. But she was also saying something about like, these are some things that we eat at home that my daughter has said she's had trouble finding here. So one of the projects before the pandemic that we were working on was a solar powered heating and cooling bed that had like a dome over it and had like this wire through it that you put on roofs, and it can heat the soil and also control the ambient temperature to grow things like yucca and turmeric and these peppers that they could only grow in the Middle East. And so that was really like, it really kind of hit home. And then when my little guy, who's now 6, was in preschool, he went to a Head Start program in Baldwin Township. Well, Baldwin has a very large Bhutanese population, and 90% of the kids in his class were Nepali. We had one or two kids that were Burmese, some children that were Turkish, a few a little girl who her family was from China, and I can't remember. Oh, we had a family from Kenya as well, and the teachers and the family advocates would say, yeah, these kids are eating at school, and at the parent meetings, they're like trying to tell them, yeah, because this is something that is actually making them sick. And for me, when babies aren't eating, they're babies. I mean, they're 3 and 4 years old. If they don't eat lunch, they're there all day. They're not eating breakfast. They're not eating lunch. They're not eating until they go home at 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and they're like starving when they get home. And then the parents are not in the best economic situations because they're still trying to like find their feet and figure it out. And imagine if you grew up in a refugee camp and then you came to a country where you don't speak the language. You assume that you're going to have months of. You're told that you'll have months of support to help finding a job and an apartment. And after 2 months, here you go.
It's like basically the same.
Have fun. Yeah, exactly. And again, not a lot of these folks read their own language. All the translations are in print, which is something else that we've addressed. But it's and just hearing back from some of the folks at the school, they're like, oh, well, they need to get used to it. Well, if it's making you sick, how can you get used to it? And then in talking with Abdul Kadir, I was finding out more and more about like his community and the women who are pregnant and receiving WIC. Well, you can only buy domestic produce on WIC with WIC checks. SNAP, you can use it, but it's a lot of the produce that is being imported in is so expensive that you're using your entire WIC check on things that could cost a lot less if they were grown closer. So a lot of it, it's a public health issue that is not being addressed at all. In fact, I've been told by organizations that advocate on a national level that this is not something that is being talked about at all. And this was last year, 2023. She said, the president of this, the executive director of this organization said, she's like, actually, you're the first person I know who has brought it up and really is doing anything to get the word out there. We started a petition, and it's still circulating. But it's a conversation that's not really happening at, the national level. It's starting to happen more and more now at a local level because I think it's been pounded into the city's ear so much from, folks like me. But yeah, and it was actually in the language of the Food Justice Fund application, the Tier 2 application, which just came out, and I was really happy to see that. But it's kind of like we're just going to pretend like it's not happening kind of situation. And that's what needs to stop, because not only is it impacting these kids, it's impacting like now, but it's going to impact them over their lifetime. They're not getting sufficient nutrients. They're not getting sufficient sustenance. This food is giving them preventable diseases at a much earlier age. There are higher rates of heart disease, of diabetes, obesity, because, they're being given foods that are full of sugar. There's only 2% of the food we eat is actually grown. The rest of the 2% of agriculture is the food that we actually eat. They're called specialty crops. Things like, tomatoes, cucumbers, eggplant, squash. Everything else is soybeans, corn, and wheat. And the corn, is for sugar. And, so it's when you come from a community
where you use natural sugar, and then you come here.
Did that shut off? Did the camera shut off? So, even like if you look at a bag of sugar in a grocery store here now, you have to see if it actually is labeled cane sugar, because more than likely it's beet sugar, which, hey, I like beets, but, again, the majority of the food that's being grown in this country is for the processing of frankenfoods, which even if you have grown up here, it's, still impacting your health in a very adverse manner. But if you've, grown up eating nothing but whole foods. Yeah, so that's a big issue is, finding foods that are familiar close by. I had a conversation with available. I had a conversation with a gal at Home Depot the one day I was there picking up shop vacs, and she was a Nepali gal, and she said that when they first moved here, they lived out by Fox Chapel. And her mother would take 2 buses or 3 buses on a Sunday to get to a grocery store that sold the food that they were used to eating on Banksville Road, clear across the other side of the city, in Pittsburgh, where we don't have the most reliable transportation, especially on a Sunday. So that's like a whole day event. So being able to find that food close by and grow it, that's an even bigger hurdle that would, or bigger gap stop that would fill that gap that would make it more accessible for folks and put them in a better place with their physical and mental and emotional health. Because a lot of what they're finding with especially like the seniors is that number one, they're feeling shame in having to get like assistance, and they're getting depressed because food is such a important connector, and it's such a huge part of their culture and their community, and it's what brings them all together. So there's a lot of isolation in not having that. There is, and it's obviously perpetuating like things like depression and anxiety, as in addition to other preventable diseases like we had talked about, like the heart disease and diabetes, because these things cause inflammation in your brain, especially if your body is not, well, it causes inflammation through your whole body too, but it causes inflammation in your brain, which causes depression and anxiety. So it's then with the maternal fetal health, women's maternal fetal health is such a joke in this country. Anyway, that's a whole different story. If you ever do anything on that, let me know. I'm your girl to talk to about that. But even more so for these women who are not getting sufficient nutrition, and it's impacting, their babies in low birth weight and spending more time in the NICU and, having high blood pressure and gestational diabetes and, putting them at risk. And a lot of these women are Black women. And as we all know, Black women are at a higher rate for maternal fetal death than any other demographic. And it is widely overlooked and played down. And it's, these are just things that are not being talked about. So, I mean, there are factors that are controllable that are contributing to food apartheid in these areas. And we don't even call them food deserts, because food desert is something that was created by a higher power. Apartheid is something that's created by man. And
that's a bar.
It's true. It's even so my favorite term is food swamp. It's, if you don't have a grocery store, but you have a Dollar General. Yeah. So that's another one that I find very useful, but, it is man-made. It is a created cesspool that, really, it's the idea of like, oh, well, they should just be happy that they have food, has kind of perpetuated. Yeah. So
I think that's the thing, which is from a government perspective, a generic Band-Aid solution that's placed across everything, rather than looking at things locally and realizing that each community, each culture has different needs.
Yeah. Even when it comes to things like butchering meat, I did not know this until last year. But I mean, I knew that there was like kosher and halal and, conventional butchering. But apparently every tribe, not every country, every tribe in Africa butchers differently. Some keep everything, some keep certain parts, some are, it's part of their belief system that the blood has to go back into the land, which I honestly think is, the USDA disagrees. But you can talk to any real butcher and they will tell you the best place for an animal to be slaughtered is on the land where it was raised, because what happens is the nutrients from that blood goes back into the soil and it fertilizes the soil, and then it goes back into, another. Yes, it's a circular ecosystem. Yeah, but you have a better quality product too. You have a healthier animal. You have a happier animal. A healthier, happier animal tastes better. I know that's awful to say, but it's true.
I mean, my taste buds will not be adverse to it.
Yeah, and it's proven over and over again. If you are eating a better quality product, you're going to eat less because it's a more nutrient dense product. And that's my biggest pet peeve about the USDA is the idea that some of these foods that they put in these supplemental boxes and these programs that they consider like to be acceptable are the worst thing that they could possibly eat. It's like, you know, why can't somebody have a better product if it's available? Just because they're poor. Just because somebody is poor does not mean that they deserve less quality or they deserve less dignity if something better is available for them to have.
Now, before we get out of here, is there any way to end on a positive note?
I mean, there's a lot of great work that's happening. My organization, just for an example, we have a few projects going on right now that all of them do incorporate immigrant and refugee or otherwise marginalized communities, like previously incarcerated folks, and the food that is being grown at some of these farms, like with Manakucha, they were just able to grow things like yucca and Somali beans and green pumpkin, like at an extended season this year. So we are looking more and more into creating spaces where people can grow their own food, but also, there's a lot of cottage industry, mom and pop food businesses popping up that need safe, legal places to cook. And so in our new space that we are purchasing, we will have a community kitchen where a lot of these folks can come and either, cook for like catering businesses or, if they want to create a value-added product. We have a community partner who we're trying to help get funding, creating they're building a cold value-added kitchen in Lawrenceville. So both of these sites are very accessible by bus. And so, I think that, the more aware we make people of, what's going on, because that's the thing, people just don't know. It's a conversation that needs to keep going. And the more people start to learn about it, the more receptive they become to say, hey, this is not right. This needs to change, whether it's policy, whether it is, availability, whether it, changing how things are available, whether it's, having a new business open, or, just inspiring people to say, tell the federal government, or, this isn't right. These things need to change, especially when it comes to the health of little ones and older folks and mamas to be. So, but yeah.
I think that's a good place to leave off. If you would like to get involved, all things from the Lettuce, Turnip, the Beet Sustainability Collective will be in the description of this episode. Get involved, see what's going on. But everything else aside, this has been another excellent episode of the Let's Talk Social Innovation podcast. I'm very glad to have had Jamie Christian on. Like I said, all of your information will be in the description of the episode when it comes out. And this is your host, Ian Kahinde, signing off. Peace out, everybody.